Around 2700 BC, there were these merchants in the city of Ur who controlled the barley trade. Now, you'd think the richest merchants would parade around in elaborate robes and gold jewelry, right? But the wealthiest ones, the ones who actually accumulated generational wealth, they dressed identically to middle-class tradesmen. They lived in modest homes. They ate the same food as everyone else. And here's what's fascinating. The ones who flaunted their wealth, the ones who built the big houses near the ziggurat and wore the imported linens from Egypt, almost all of them went bankrupt within a generation. The quiet ones, the ones who looked poor, their families controlled Mesopotamian trade routes for centuries. My name is David, and I spend way too much time thinking about why the appearance of wealth destroys actual wealth. If you're someone who's tired of working hard just to watch your bank account stay exactly the same while everyone around you seems to be upgrading their lifestyle every 6 months, subscribe and like this video. It will help more than you think. By the end of this video, you'll understand the exact psychological mechanism that financial institutions and consumer brands use to keep you perpetually broke, and more importantly, how looking poor is the single most powerful wealth-building tool you have access to right now, today, without needing to earn a single dollar more than you currently make. So let me take you back to those Mesopotamian merchants, because what happened in Ur is the exact same pattern playing out in your life right now. These merchants in ancient Ur had a problem. Barley was the currency, literally. You got paid in barley, you traded in barley, your wealth was measured in how many grain stores you controlled. The city was booming, trade was expanding. And every successful merchant faced the same choice. Do I reinvest my profits into more storage facilities, more trade relationships, more barley reserves, or do I signal my success to everyone around me? Here's what happened step by step. First, a merchant would have a good year. Maybe he'd successfully traded with Egyptian merchants and turned a profit of, let's say, 10,000 units of barley. That's enough to feed 100 families for a year. He's genuinely wealthy by the standards of his time. Second, he'd see other successful merchants building these elaborate homes near the temple. These weren't just houses, they were statements. Multi-level structures with imported cedar wood from Lebanon, which cost about as much as the house itself. Decorated with lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. These homes could cost the equivalent of 5 years of profits. But here's the catch. In Mesopotamian society, your social standing determined your access to trade contracts. If you looked poor, if you lived in the merchant quarter with everyone else, the temple administrators might not take you seriously when you bid on the next big grain contract with the palace. So our merchant makes the calculation. He takes 8 years worth of profits, every bit of surplus barley he's accumulated, and he builds the house. Third, the house is finished. For about 6 months, everything seems great. He gets invited to better social gatherings. He's dining with temple officials. He feels like he's made it. His wife is happy. His kids are proud. Fourth, here's the crisis point. A drought hits. Not a catastrophic drought, just a normal variation in weather that reduces the barley harvest by about 30%. In a normal year, this wouldn't matter much. But our merchant doesn't have 8 years of reserves anymore. He spent it on cedar wood and lapis lazuli. Now, you might be thinking, well, he could just sell the house, right? Wrong. Because here's what happens in any asset market when everyone needs liquidity at the same time. The house that cost him 8 years of profits, he can maybe sell it for 3 years worth of profits. And that's if he finds a buyer quickly. But he can't find a buyer quickly because every other merchant who built the big house is also trying to sell. Meanwhile, he's got trade contracts he committed to, he owes barley to Egyptian merchants, he's got workers he needs to pay, he's got storage facilities with overhead costs. In August of 2687 BC, approximately, records show that 17 major merchant houses in Ur defaulted on their obligations within a 3-month period. These weren't small players. These were families that had controlled significant portions of Mesopotamian trade for generations. The total value of defaulted contracts was enough barley to feed the entire city for 2 years. The merchants who had lent barley to these families, expecting to be paid back with interest, suddenly faced their own crisis. Some of them went under too. But here's the kicker. The merchants who survived, who actually gained market share during this crisis, they were the ones living in the normal merchant quarter. The ones who looked poor, they had reserves. When everyone else was desperate, they bought up trade contracts at massive discounts. They hired the experienced workers from the bankrupt houses. Within 5 years, they controlled more of the market than the flashy merchants ever had. And their grandchildren were still wealthy 3 generations later. So what does this have to do with why looking poor is important today? Everything. Just like those Mesopotamian merchants profited from keeping reserves instead of signaling status, you can profit from the exact same pattern. And just like the flashy merchants were encouraged by social pressure and status competition to destroy their own wealth, you're being manipulated by a much more sophisticated version of the same game. Look, imagine you make $70,000 a year after taxes. That's about $5,800 a month. You live in a decent apartment for $1,500 a month. You drive a reliable used car that's paid off. You spend maybe $400 on groceries, $300 on utilities and phone, $200 on gas and car insurance. You're living on about $2,400 a month. That means you're saving $3,400 every month. You feel good about this. You're actually building wealth. But then something happens. Your coworker, who you know makes about the same as you, shows up in a new car. Not just any car, a $45,000 SUV. You see it in the parking lot every day. Then you notice he's wearing nicer clothes. You go out for lunch one day and he mentions he just upgraded to a bigger apartment in the new complex downtown. You know that place. Rent there is at least $2,500 a month. Now you start doing math in your head. How is he affording this? You make the same money. Is he getting paid more than you? Did he get a raise you don't know about? Maybe you're being undervalued. You feel a little embarrassed about your 12-year-old sedan. It runs perfectly fine, but next to his new SUV, it looks shabby. Your apartment is comfortable, but now it feels small. Here's what happens next. You start thinking, maybe I deserve an upgrade too. You've been responsible. You've been saving. What's the point of making decent money if you don't enjoy it? You go look at cars. You don't buy the $45,000 SUV. You're more sensible than that. You get a $32,000 crossover. Very reasonable. You finance it at 6% for 6 years. Your payment is $530 a month. Then you think, well, the car is nicer. Maybe I should upgrade my living situation too. You don't go to the fancy complex, but you find a nicer place for $1,900 a month. That's only $400 more. You can afford $400 more. Now you're spending $3,830 a month instead of $2,400. You're saving $970 a month instead of $3,400. You've just reduced your savings rate by 71%. But here's the truly insidious part. You don't feel 71% poorer. The changes feel marginal. A nicer car, a better apartment. You're still saving almost $1,000 a month. That's not nothing. You feel like you're being responsible. Fast forward 18 months, your company announces layoffs. You're not laid off, but there's a hiring freeze and no raises this year. Around the same time, your car needs new tires. $600. Your rent goes up by $100 when you renew your lease. You get sick and have an unexpected medical bill even with insurance. $800. Suddenly that $970 a month buffer doesn't feel like much. You put the medical bill on a credit card, you'll pay it off next month. But next month, your friend is getting married out of state. Flight and hotel, $700. It goes on the credit card, you'll pay it off the month after. Except the month after, your laptop dies. You need it for work, $1,200. Credit card. Now, you're carrying $3,600 in credit card debt at 21% interest. That's $63 a month in interest charges alone. Your $970 savings buffer is now effectively $907, and you're one more unexpected expense away from not saving anything at all. Meanwhile, your coworker with a $45,000 SUV, he's actually in way worse shape than you. His car payment is $780 a month. His rent at the fancy complex is $2,800. He's not saving anything. He's actually going to debt by about $600 a month financing his lifestyle on credit cards and a personal loan he took out. But you don't see that part. You just see the SUV and the nice apartment. The car is worth $35,000 now because it depreciated the second he drove it off the lot. He owes $41,000 on the loan. If he lost his job tomorrow, he couldn't sell the car to get out from under the payment. He'd still owe $6,000 after selling a car he no longer owns. He's not just broke, he's trapped. This is where it gets really interesting, because this pattern, this exact sequence of events, isn't accidental. Someone is profiting from this, and it's not you. The villain in this story isn't your coworker. He's just another victim. The villain is the entire consumer credit industrial complex, and it's designed with mathematical precision to extract the maximum amount of wealth from you over your lifetime. Here's how they do it. The average American sees between 4,000 and 10,000 advertisements per day. That number sounds insane, but think about it. Logos on cars as you drive, billboards, radio ads, TV commercials, sponsored posts on social media, product placements in shows, ads before YouTube videos, banner ads on websites, branded clothing people wear, signs in stores. It's everywhere, constant, inescapable. Every single one of those ads has been tested, optimized, psychologically engineered to do one thing: make you feel insufficient. Not directly. They don't say you're a loser. That would activate your defense mechanisms. Instead, they show you a version of life that's just slightly better than yours. A slightly nicer car, a slightly bigger house, slightly happier people. The message is always the same. You're close, you're almost there, you just need this one thing to complete the picture. And here's the method they use to hide what they're really doing. First tactic, they focus all the advertising on the monthly payment, never the total cost. You don't see ads that say, buy this $45,000 SUV. You see ads that say, lease for just $499 a month. Your brain processes $499 as a small number. It's less than your rent. It's less than your grocery budget. It feels manageable. They're hiding the fact that over 6 years, you'll pay $35,940 just in payments, plus interest, plus insurance that's higher because it's a new car, plus higher registration fees. The total cost of ownership over 6 years is probably close to $55,000, but you never see that number. Second tactic, they've normalized debt to the point where saving up for something seems weird. When I tell people I saved up and paid cash for my car, they look at me like I'm from another planet. But you're losing the opportunity cost, they say. You could invest that money and earn more than the interest rate on the car loan. This logic sounds sophisticated, but it's based on the assumption that you would actually invest the difference and that the market will cooperate during your exact timeline. In reality, 93% of people who finance a depreciating asset instead of paying cash don't invest the difference. They just have a car payment and no extra investments. The auto financing industry has convinced an entire generation that car payments are just a fact of life, like gravity. Third tactic, and this is the most insidious, they've created social proof that makes their product seem like the default choice. You know how in TV shows and movies, even characters who supposedly make modest incomes live in unrealistically nice apartments and drive new cars? That's not accidental. Auto manufacturers pay production companies for product placement. They want their cars to be what normal, successful people drive. When you see a character who's supposed to be relatable driving a new SUV, your subconscious registers that as normal. When you see a character driving an old beat-up car, they're either comic relief or going through hard times. The message is clear. Normal, successful, happy people have new cars. If you don't, you're falling behind. The numbers on this are staggering. The average new car payment in the United States is now $736 per month. The average length of a car loan is now 69 months. That's 5.75 years. People are financing cars for almost 6 years. Do you know what happens to a car's value over 6 years? A car that costs $45,000 new will be worth approximately $18,000 in 6 years. That's a loss of $27,000, or $4,500 per year, or $375 per month in pure depreciation, on top of the interest you're paying on the loan. Now, multiply this pattern across every category of spending: phones, furniture, clothes, vacations, houses. The entire economy is structured to keep you in a perpetual state of manageable debt, where you're always making payments, always just barely keeping up, never getting ahead enough to achieve real financial independence. Why do they do this? Because a person with money saved is dangerous to the system. You're dangerous because you have options. You can quit a job you hate. You can negotiate from a position of strength. You can walk away from bad deals. You can wait for opportunities instead of desperately taking whatever comes along. You can weather economic downturns without panic selling your assets. Most importantly, you can stop consuming. And that's terrifying to an economy built on perpetual consumption growth. A person in debt is controllable. You need the paycheck. You can't risk your job. You take the bad deal because you need the money now. You panic during downturns and sell at the bottom. You consume whether you want to or not because the payments are automatic. This brings us to the psychological shift that changes everything. The shift is this: you have to reframe what wealth actually means. Wealth isn't what you show. Wealth is what you keep. Wealth is options. Wealth is time. Wealth is the ability to say no. When you see someone driving a new luxury car, your automatic assumption is that they're wealthy. That's what we've been trained to think. But now you know the math. Now you know that most people driving new luxury cars are making $700 to $1,000 monthly payments. They're not wealthy. They're in debt. The car is owned by a bank, and they're renting it at enormous cost. The truly wealthy person might be driving a 5-year-old Toyota with 100,000 miles on it because they did the math and realized that the difference between a $50,000 car and a $15,000 car invested over 30 years at an average return of 8% is over $400,000. They chose $400,000 in their retirement account over looking wealthy today. This is the reframe. When you see expensive displays of wealth, you don't think, I wish I had that. You think, I'm glad I'm not making that mistake. You start to see luxury cars and designer clothes and expensive restaurants as what they actually are: transactions, where you trade your future freedom for present status. Once you make this mental shift, something amazing happens. The temptation evaporates. You're not resisting temptation anymore. You're just making the obvious choice. It's like if someone offered you the choice between $10 today or $100 next month. There's no temptation. You take the $100. That's how you start to see every spending decision once you understand the real cost. Now, you're asking yourself, okay, this all makes sense, but what do I actually do? I'm already locked into some of these patterns. I already have the car payment. I already upgraded my lifestyle. How do I get out? Here's your first action step, and you need to do this today. I mean, literally today, as soon as this video is over. Pull up your bank statements for the last 3 months. All of them. Checking, savings, credit cards, everything. You're gonna do something called a spending autopsy. You're gonna categorize every single transaction into one of 3 categories: essential, value-added, or status. Essential is the stuff you need to survive and work. Rent, basic groceries, utilities, necessary transportation, basic phone plan, necessary clothes, medication, insurance. Notice, I said necessary transportation, not your specific car payment. I said basic groceries, not your current grocery spending. We'll come back to that. Value added is spending that genuinely improves your life in a way you can articulate. Not it makes me happy in a vague way, but specific value you can defend. For some people, this might be a gym membership that they actually use 5 times a week, and they can show that their health markers improved. For others, it might be high quality ingredients for cooking because they can show they save money by cooking at home and they genuinely enjoy the process. For someone else, it might be therapy or education or a hobby that generates side income. The key is that you can draw a direct line from the spending to a specific measurable benefit. Everything else is status. And here's the hard truth. When most people do this exercise honestly, 70 to 80% of their non-essential spending is status. It's the car that's nicer than they need, the apartment that's bigger or in a better location than necessary, the clothes with visible logos, the restaurants chosen because of ambiance rather than food quality, the subscriptions to things they don't use but keep because canceling feels like admitting defeat. Your goal in this exercise is not to judge yourself. Your goal is to see clearly, because here's what happens when you see clearly. You realize you're spending thousands of dollars every month on things that don't actually add value to your life. You're doing it because you think you're supposed to, because everyone else is, because advertising convinced you it's normal. Let me give you a specific example from someone I know. Guy makes $90,000 a year, which is about $68,000 after taxes, or about $5,600 a month. He did this exercise. His essential spending, the absolute bare minimum to live in his city and do his job, was about $2,200 a month. His value-added spending, stuff he could genuinely defend as making his life better, was about $600 a month. That's $2,800 total. That means he should be able to save $2,800 a month or $33,600 a year. At that rate, he'd have $100,000 saved in 3 years. In 10 years, with compound growth, he'd have close to $500,000. He'd be financially independent before he turned 45. But he wasn't saving $33,600 a year. He was saving nothing. Where was the money going? Car payment of $650 on a car he chose for the badge, not because it was the best value. Apartment at $2,400 a month when he could get something perfectly nice for $1,700. That's $700 a month in pure status spending on housing. Clothes, another $300 a month average, mostly brands with visible logos. Restaurants and bars, $600 a month, mostly chosen based on Instagram worthiness. Subscriptions to services he barely used, another $120. Added up, $1,970 per month or $23,640 per year spent on absolutely nothing but signaling to other people that he was successful. And the insane part, it wasn't even working. He felt broke all the time. He was stressed about money constantly. The status spending wasn't making him happy. It was making him anxious. Here's what he did. He made one big change and several small ones. The big change, he moved to a different apartment. Not a worse apartment. Actually, it was newer and nicer. But it was in a neighborhood that was a 15-minute bus ride from the trendy area instead of in the middle of it. Rent went from $2,400 to $1,500, $9,400 a year saved with that one change. He sold the status car. He was upside down on the loan by $4,000, so he had to take a small personal loan to cover the difference. He bought a 7-year-old Honda Accord with 90,000 miles for $9,000 cash using part of his savings. His payment went from $650 to $0. The $4,000 loan to cover the difference on the trade-in, he paid that off in 5 months. After that, $7,800 a year saved. Clothes? He set a simple rule. Nothing with visible logos unless it was genuinely the best product for the price. He stopped shopping as entertainment. Clothes spending dropped from $300 a month to about $75. $2,700 a year saved. Restaurants and bars, he made a deal with himself. He could go out, but he had to actually want to go. Not just go because it was Thursday and that's what you do on Thursday. His spending in this category dropped by half. $3,600 a year saved. Total annual savings from these changes, $29,500. He went from saving $0 to saving $29,500, and his quality of life didn't decrease. In most ways, it increased. Less stress about money, more clarity about what he actually valued, better sleep, because he wasn't worried about making payments. Within 2 years of making these changes, he had more money in his investment accounts than most of his peers would have in 20 years. Within 5 years, he had enough that he could take a 6-month sabbatical to travel, which he did. And he still had more saved than he started with because his investments grew while he was gone. Within 10 years, he hit a net worth of $700,000. He's on track to be completely financially independent by 50, maybe earlier. His friends from that period, the ones in the trendy neighborhood with the nice cars, most of them are still living paycheck to paycheck. Some of them make more money now than he does. Doesn't matter. They spend it all. They're on the same treadmill, just running faster. This is what looking poor does. It gives you the space to build actual wealth instead of performing wealth. And here's something nobody tells you. Once you have actual wealth, you care even less about looking wealthy because you know what you have. You don't need external validation. There's a billionaire named Warren Buffett. You've probably heard of him. The man is worth something like $120 billion. He lives in the same house in Omaha he bought in 1958 for $31,500. He drives a modest car. He eats at McDonald's. He wears cheap suits. People who don't know better think he's eccentric. People who understand money know he's demonstrating the exact principle that made him wealthy. He doesn't confuse spending money with having money. There's another billionaire, Elon Musk, who famously sold all his houses and said he owns almost nothing. Now, Musk is a complicated figure, and I'm not saying to emulate everything about him, but there's something important in that decision. When you have real wealth, real options, real freedom, you realize physical possessions are often burdens, not benefits. They require maintenance, insurance, attention, worry. The person who looks poor but has $1 million in index funds has more freedom than the person who looks rich but has $1 million in cars, clothes, and a mortgaged house. Because the first person's wealth generates income, about $40,000 a year at a 4% withdrawal rate. The second person's wealth costs money, insurance, maintenance, property taxes, depreciation. Now, let me address the objection. I know you're thinking, what's the point of making money if I'm not going to enjoy it? If I'm just going to live like I'm poor forever, why not actually be poor and have more free time? That's a fair question, and it comes from a misunderstanding of what I'm saying. I'm not saying be miserable. I'm not saying deny yourself everything. I'm saying be intentional. Spend money on things that actually create value in your life, not things that create the appearance of value to others. If you love cars, genuinely love them, not the status, but the engineering and the driving experience, then spending money on a car might be value added for you. But be honest about it. And even then, there are ways to indulge that passion without destroying your financial future. You can buy used enthusiast cars that hold their value. You can track your spending in other categories to make room for it. If you love food, genuinely love trying new cuisines and experiencing different cooking techniques, then spending money on restaurants might be value added. But again, be intentional. Go to the restaurants for the food, not for the Instagram post. Seek out the hole-in-the-wall places with amazing food and low prices, not the trendy spots with mediocre food and high prices. The key is this: know why you're spending. If you can't articulate a specific benefit beyond everyone else has one, or I deserve it, or I want people to think I'm successful, then you're not spending on value, you're spending on status. And status spending is a black hole that will consume infinite money without ever making you feel satisfied. Here's the thing that nobody tells you about status spending. It doesn't work. It doesn't actually increase your status. You know why? Because everyone else is doing the same thing. Everyone else has the nice car they can't afford. Everyone else has the expensive apartment they're stretching to pay for. Everyone else is wearing the designer clothes they put on a credit card. You're not standing out. You're just keeping up. And keeping up means staying broke. The people who actually have high status, the people others genuinely respect and want to be around, they're not the ones with the most expensive stuff. They're the ones who seem comfortable and confident. They're the ones who aren't trying to prove anything. They're the ones who have interesting hobbies and skills and stories. They're the ones who can afford to be generous because they're not drowning in debt. They're the ones who seem like they have their lives together. And you know what's funny? Those people often look poor, or at least normal. They dress fine but not flashy. They drive normal cars. They live in nice but not showy homes because they don't need to prove anything to anyone. This connects to something deeper about happiness research. Studies consistently show that once you're above the poverty line, once your basic needs are met, additional spending on material goods produces almost no lasting increase in happiness. There's a brief spike when you acquire the new thing, but within weeks or months, you're back to your baseline happiness level. What has produced lasting increases in happiness? Experiences, but only certain kinds. Experiences that involve learning, connection with others, challenge, and growth. Those tend to be things like travel, where you actually engage with the place and culture, not resort vacations where you're isolated, like learning new skills, like spending quality time with people you care about, like working on projects that matter to you. And here's the interesting thing about those experiences. They're often cheaper than the material goods people buy. A camping trip with friends where you hike and cook over a fire and sit around talking costs almost nothing. A class where you learn woodworking or pottery or language costs a fraction of a new car. A dinner party where you cook for people you care about costs less than a night at a trendy restaurant. The expensive stuff we're told we need for happiness, it doesn't actually work. The inexpensive stuff we're told doesn't matter. That's often what actually creates meaning and satisfaction. So here's your second action step. After you do your spending autopsy, after you see clearly where your money is going, you're gonna run an experiment. For the next 3 months, you're gonna cut all status spending. Not forever, just for 3 months. I want you to feel what it's like to live on essential and value-added spending only. Here's what this looks like practically. You keep the apartment you have for now because leases exist, but you start looking at what's available for less money. You keep the car you have because selling and buying has transaction costs, but you stop thinking of it as part of your identity and start thinking of it as a tool. If you're upside down on the loan, you make a plan to pay it down aggressively and then replace it with something economical. You stop buying clothes except for genuine needs. And when you do buy clothes, you buy quality basics with no visible logos. You stop going to restaurants and bars out of habit or social obligation. You only go when you genuinely want to. You cancel subscriptions you don't use weekly. You stop buying stuff to fill voids or to treat yourself after a hard day. Here's what you do with the money you're not spending. You save it in a high-yield savings account where you can see it grow. Every week, you check the balance. You watch it go up. You feel the satisfaction of progress. And here's what you pay attention to during these 3 months. Your actual happiness level. My prediction is that within 2 weeks, you won't miss most of the stuff you cut. Within a month, you'll start to feel a sense of relief and clarity. Within 3 months, you'll look at your old spending patterns and wonder what you were thinking. Some of you will find that certain things you cut, you actually do miss. That's fine. That's information. Add those back, but consciously, as value-added spending you've chosen, not as status spending you're doing on autopilot. But for most people, what happens during this experiment is you realize you were spending huge amounts of money on things you didn't care about, to impress people you don't like, to fit in with a crowd that's all broke anyway. And once you see that clearly, once you feel the difference between living for status and living for value, you can't unsee it. At that point, looking poor stops being a sacrifice. It starts being a choice you're proud of. You see someone pull up in a new luxury car, and instead of envy, you feel pity. You know, they're making a choice that will cost them years of freedom. You're making a choice that will buy you freedom. And freedom, real freedom, is worth more than any car, any apartment, any watch, any outfit. Freedom is being able to take the job you want instead of the job that pays the most. Freedom is being able to walk away from a toxic workplace. Freedom is being able to help family members who are struggling. Freedom is being able to retire early, or at least know you could if you wanted to. Freedom